We've been in a bit of a drought for information on the next entry in the mainline Resident Evil series for a good while now, with Village having been released in 2021 and the Shadows of Rose DLC coming out in 2022. It's been over a year since we've really had any new content on the continued story outside the remakes, not to mention the fact that Shadows of Rose gave us very little in terms of the continued narrative. However, a few months back when I was brushing through the Resident Evil 0 story for my lore videos, I happened across a name that caught my attention. As you may have guessed, that person's name was Brandon Bailey, and he is one of, if not the, only tie to the Umbrella founders that the story has left. If you're unaware of who Brandon Bailey is, then you're not alone. He has a kind of covert importance to the series that, if you're like me, you probably wouldn't pick up on. His first introduction to the games came in Resident Evil 5, but so far he's been entirely relegated to the documents. He, along with James Marcus's mentor, were the first people to discover the progenitor virus in Africa. They'd made the expedition based on a book entitled Survey of Natural History, which outlined various customs, stories, creatures, and plant life from around the region. They'd arrived at the location the book mentioned to find a place known as the Stairway of the Sun, and in its garden, they would find a flower which contained the basis for a virus, which they would dub progenitor. Unfortunately for them, however, the location was considered sacred ground by the local Nidapaya tribe, and they would be forced to fend off constant attacks while they did their initial testing. These attacks would eventually push them out of the area entirely, but not without several samples of the flower to further test once they returned home from their trip. At the time, Marcus worked at a Swiss university, but when the samples they'd brought back with them didn't grow in the laboratories back home, his funding would be cut, forcing Marcus into the arms of an old acquaintance of his, Oswellie Spencer. Spencer would offer to help fund the program on the caveat that the research be done under his supervision with no communication to the larger scientific community, a request which Marcus would accept, bringing his assistant Bailey along for the ride. Spencer would establish the Umbrella Corporation as a means of attaining funds for this venture, but for Marcus and Bailey, it was becoming glaringly apparent that they couldn't reproduce the conditions to grow more samples of the progenitor flower. After a few short years, they would run out of all the samples they'd collected and would begin making plans for another trek into the African marshlands. They would bring these plans to Spencer, but Spencer would ultimately turn them down, instead suggesting that Bailey go alone so that Marcus could continue the invaluable research in a laboratory fit for his expertise. Marcus and Bailey would agree to these conditions, and in the coming months, Bailey would make the long trip back to Africa to help establish a steady supply of the progenitor flower.
Umbrella.
What? What was Umbrella doing?
I don't know.
Bailey would manage this facility until 1998, when it would be shut down after the Raccoon City debacle. But what's even more interesting, and what makes Brandon Bailey of particular note for the current events of the games, is that he was actually the founder of current Big Bad, The Connections, as we can see in a report from the BSAA uncovered by Zoe Baker. These are basically all the details that we have about Brandon at present, but given that this was something revealed to us in RE8, I would assume that whenever the Connections are finally confronted by the heroes in RE9 or whatever, their founding and Brandon specifically will be something that we learn a good deal more about. Umbrella as an organization is a concept that's been danced around in the series for a very long time at this point. They've been disbanded since Resident Evil 4, and yet we keep getting references to them even now. In 5, we got glimpses into their founding and saw the demise of Spencer. In 6, Carla Radamez named her organization Neo Umbrella. In 7, we got the introduction of Blue Umbrella, and in 8, we saw where Spencer got the idea for the Umbrella and his connections to Miranda. Clearly, Capcom wants to keep the legacy of Umbrella alive, and I feel like Brandon is a real shot at actually giving us a story about someone who was associated with the organization in an important position at the time of its actual relevance. Not to mention the harm that his own organization would go on to cause after his separation. As for what exactly they would do with a character like this, your guess is as good as mine. It's even possible that he's dead, as a document from Spencer in RE5 would seem to suggest. However, with the revelation that he was the Connections founder, I would assume that this was a mistake on Spencer's part, or that it's just something that they're gonna retcon. I feel like we didn't get satisfying conclusions to any of the Umbrella co-founders. 2 died before we ever even learned who they were, and Spencer was killed off by Wesker. Without huge rewrites to the story, we'll likely never get to confront any of these individuals, but Brandon is a way to personify both the connections and the past Umbrella Corporation, as he was an integral member of each during their founding. With his bond with Marcus, I can envision him still deifying his former mentor. It may even be a way to bring zombies back into the series, as maybe he wants to expand on Marcus's developments of the T-Virus. I would love to see something in that vein, but is that what we're gonna get? It's hard to say at this point, with how shrouded in mystery the connections have been. So I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. Anyways, thank you all for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.